Wednesday, June the 17th. Lake level's 918.8, and it's coming up a bunch. It's seemed like today, I just looked, and it's coming up almost a half an inch an hour. Beaver Lake is right at the top of the dam, so they're letting a bunch of water out of it. We've had a lot of rain, and lake could come up a bunch more, because they're talking like we could get 3 to 5 inches of rain in the next 36 hours or so from that tropical storm Bill. But that's kind of changed the fishing. The lake had settled down a little bit to where they had shut the floodgates last week, and the fish were starting to get on a drop shot pretty good. But I think what's happening now that they've cranked the water back up, they've got several of the floodgates open on Table Rock. There's a lot more current, and it's brought them fish up higher in the water column. Seems like a lot of the fish earlier in the week, I was catching them out there on a drop shot, and I was catching them on a spoon, and they were 30, 35 feet deep. But it seemed like once they started generating a lot more water, the drop shot bite and stuff and spoon bite's not near as good. But I am catching them on a spoon real good, just not vertical fishing. What we're doing is we're doing a lot of casting with the spoon. You'll see a lot of the fish are suspended, anywhere from 8 to 20 feet deep, which is a little too shallow for the drop shot. But we've been taking like a fish head spin, a 3/8 ounce or a ½ ounce, and what I've been putting on it is a Swim Fluke Junior as a trailer. Been using a Strike King flutter spoon. Dixie Jet is also someone that makes a real good one. And I've been using a slab spoon as well, a ½ ounce or 3/4 ounce. And the way I've been fishing the fish head and the flutter spoon, I've been counting it down 6 to 8, sometimes 10 feet. The flutter spoon, I'm jerking it, kind of yo-yoing it back to the boat. I'll jerk it, let it flutter back down. As I'm letting it go back down, you want to keep the slack out of your line, because that's a lot of the time, that's when you'll get your bites a lot of times. Try to keep that line fairly taut. Now on the fish head, I'm just kind of counting it down and fishing it just like you would a spinnerbait. And I think you could probably get bit on a spinnerbait as well. Just, I'm getting this down 6 to 8 feet, depending on how deep I'm seeing the fish on the fish finder. And I'm trying to keep the bait in that depth and slower on it. Now the drop shot fish I've been catching have been real good quality. They've probably been some of the bigger Kentuckys. The problem is I'm just not catching a lot of them in one spot. And a lot of times whenever we'd catch one, we'd have doubles and even triples. We'd have a small group of fish down there and get one hook to get them fired up. And they've been, like I say, good 2.5, 2 and 3 pound Kentuckys, good fat ones. And what I've been using out there is pretty much just a 4-inch worm, a Zoom Chompers, a brown purple lamb. Here's one that a buddy of mine makes that's a hand pour. It's a plum. Watermelon candy will work as well. And a lot of these places, they've been out on some of the gravel flats, on the main lake points. They've been around some of these deep docks. Now if you can't get bit on the drop shot on these flat gravel points, back up in there shallower, and you'll start seeing those fish suspended. A lot of times you can take an area where you drop shot and cast the bait towards the spoon or the fish head towards the bank, and those fish are out there suspended. Normally we got a good thermocline in the lake right now, 25 to 30 feet, which would group them fish up in that depth. But normally when they're running this much water, the current like it is, you won't get a good thermocline setup. So I think that's what's going on. The fish were starting to set up in that depth range, but now they've moved back up a little bit higher and suspended. Haven't been catching too many fish on top water. I've been seeing a few flop around, catching a few small fish, but most of the fish, even early, seem to be 8 or 10 foot below surface. You can try a swim bait. I've also been catching some on crankbait. Now the areas of the lake, I think the dam area is a little bit tougher. I think from Kimberling City on up to like Big M. We had a real good day up there Monday at Big M on a spoon, on some gravel flats, and then we started swimming the spoon, like a flutter spoon and a slab spoon, just letting it go to bottom and ripping it up. Setting the boat in 25, 30 feet, casting about 15 to 18 foot on some of the gravel banks. Now the flutter spoon and the fish head seem to be working a little bit better on points, and just inside the points where you got deep water close by, where you got submerged timber. And you don't necessarily have to get the bait down in the timber, just over the top of it. Them fish are suspending out over the tops of them trees. Now, something's been coming into play as well. I don't know exactly what the current is going to do to these fish in the river arms, but I can get up into like Ants Creek area, up into the James, and even around Kimberling City and Campbell Point areas, and I've been able to catch them on a deep diving crankbait. Like a 6XD Strike King series and a sexy shad or a chartreuse sexy shad's working good. Fat-free shad will work, you know, bomber. Anything that kind of runs down there in that 14 to 18 foot range. Some of these fish have been on bottom, some of them have been suspended in the trees. Seems like you just got to cover a lot of water. Still haven't got a real good bottom bite as far as a jig or a wobblehead or a Texas rig worm. It seems like the more fish are up off the bottom. A lot of the crankbait fish I'm catching, I'm not grinding the bottom, it's when the bait leaves the bottom, like when it rolls off from 15 to 20 foot. And even some of them fish, if I'm setting out there, some of them areas, I may be setting in 30, 35 feet of water, and I know that crankbait's only getting down to 15 to 16 foot, but it's banging around some of them treetops on them main lake and secondary points. A little bit easier to work it through like points that you know have got hardwood trees or pole timber, rather than the cedar trees. You don't get hung up quite as much. So I mean, I really look, if we get a bunch of rain in the next day and a half, 2 days like they're predicting, the lake's probably going to come up, I don't know for sure, you know, another 3, 4, maybe even 5 feet. There's going to be a lot of current for a week or so. Now that's not going to, you know, be any problem. If you come into the lake, you'll still have plenty of places to launch. The only thing you might have to watch out for when the water comes up like that, a lot of laydowns and debris that's on the bank will get up there and start floating around. So you just got to be careful when you're running, especially when there's no wind. That stuff will kind of linger around out in the middle of the lake. So, you know, just be careful for any visible logs and trees that you see out there floating if the lake does come up. Right now, I mean, there's hardly nothing out there floating around, but like I say, if it comes up, that stuff's going to come up off the banks and start floating. But the good thing about with the current that they're running, I mean, I think you can catch them on a spinnerbait. The only thing is you might have to drop that spinnerbait down and slow roll it. I'm not finding a lot of fish up in the bushes. They're more out away from the bank, and I think as the water comes up, I don't think we're going to see a big mad rush where the fish are going up into the newly flooded brush. I think they're more apt to stay out there by the old bank line and where they were, but just come up a little bit higher in the water column. So just be careful out there this next week with, you know, we got a lot of rain coming in. There's have to be a lot of floating debris out there. Just be safe. And till next week, good luck, good fishing.